Hi, everybody. This is Karen Olson Ramanujan, and I'm really excited to welcome you to the People, Power and Permaculture in Cuba and Beyond call. I'm really excited to share with you several guests that we've invited for this panel to talk about their reflections at the International Permaculture Convergence in Cuba. Let's go on to the next slide. That's me trying to use a drill to make a chicken tractor. And I wanted to host this panel because, like probably many of you, I have home and family obligations, work obligations, sometimes shortage of funds, and I don't get to go to all the cool, groovy permaculture happenings always. And I always feel like, I really wanted to hear from this person and that person. So I decided, heck, I'm going to get together some great people I know and hear from them what their highlights were, and I really wanted to share this with you. This is spurred on by my work that I've been doing really around women's leadership in permaculture, and I invite you to comment on this slide you can see, to comment on my pattern language for women in permaculture. If you go to my website under Thought Leadership, you'll find that. So you can read it, you can help us evolve the language. I want to give a big thanks to Peter Bain, who really said he was visiting for his book tour, and he said, great, I want you to write that, here's the deadline. And there's nothing like that kind of support to make you put yourself out in the world. I also want to thank Scott Mann, who interviewed me for the Permaculture podcast. So you can go to that and listen to that interview. What I feel like it's the biggest contribution for that article in my work is really around starting the conversations in social permaculture about how do we design for the type of inclusive community that we want? How do we really make conscious decisions to create a culture that encourage people to take leadership, make openings, and in that vein, I want to give gratitude to Starhawk, who I think is one of the pioneers of social permaculture. And I purposely didn't invite her because I think everybody looks to her as the social permaculture person. And I want us all to know that there's a lot of people out there thinking about this. And I wanted you to meet some of them. So that's my main motivation for today. Logistics-wise, if you are on the phone, could you please press *2 to raise your hand so that I know you can hear me? And there's a delay, so I'm going to wait a minute. And if you are on the web, if you could go to the Q&A box and type in yes or hello or something like that, that would be really helpful because then I would be able to see. Oh, great. Yep. I can see there's people typing stuff in. So I'm just going to wait a moment. Make sure everybody's hearing everything. Great. You raised your hand. Okay. So sounds like we're a go. Excited about this. I'm going to check the Q&As again. Yep. Okay. Great. So I want to welcome our first guest, Bonita Ford. Bonita, you can go ahead and introduce yourself, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Karen, so much for organizing and hosting this. I've been really, really excited just to be in conversation with you and with the others in this last few weeks, so I'm excited just to be here today. So just a quick word about me. My name is Bonita Ford, and I'm from the Permaculture Institute of Eastern Ontario. I'm in Ottawa. I'm just outside of Ottawa, Ontario, in Canada. And before we start, I just want to invite all of us to imagine that we're sitting in a big circle together, just to kind of have this sense of being in community. So just to imagine that we're sitting out in a beautiful place in nature and that we get to look around this big circle and see all of these smiling faces from so many parts of the world, just to be able to tap in a little bit to this bigger community that we're a part of. And so today I want to just give you a really mini version of the workshop that I shared at the International Permaculture Convergence, and then share some little highlights, some stories from the convergence. And what I'll start with is the 4 quadrants from the integral framework. So this work comes from Ken Wilber, and I want to offer the 4 quadrants to all of us as a lens, as a tool to help us look at the work that we're doing in permaculture. And so Ken Wilber says that with everything, there is an exterior aspect and there is an interior aspect. So the exterior aspect of something it's objective, it's observable, it's knowable from the outside, and the interior aspect can really only be experienced and known really to the subject. There's also the individual and the collective aspect to everything. So everything we are a part and we are a part of a bigger whole. And when we overlap these 4 layers, we actually have 4 very distinct quadrants that cannot be they're not reducible one to the other. And so we can start with the right-hand quadrants, and the quadrants are named very simply. So the upper right-hand quadrant, UR, you can see that in the slide there. It's the intersection of the individual and the exterior aspects. And so this is the place where we can be looking at the individual person, their actions, their body, my actions, my behaviors, and my body can all be observed, and some of these things can actually be measured. Similarly, with the lower right-hand quadrant, so the LR, it's the intersection of the exterior and the collective. And this is the place where we're really focusing on, this is where our systems and structures are situated. So this is the place where we have our social and our ecological systems. And again, with anything on these 2 right-hand quadrants, these are exteriors, so we can observe them, we can know them, we can measure them from the outside. Then we have the 2 left-hand quadrants. The upper left-hand quadrant, so UL, is the intersection of individual and interior, and it's really the place of, it's the personal quadrant. It's the place of self and consciousness and experience, and it's my own personal experience, your own personal experience, that is only known to each of us from the inside. And then similarly, the lower left-hand quadrant, LL, is the intersection of the interior and the collective. And that's the place of culture. It's the place where we have shared and collective meaning. It's where we have shared experience together. And so for me, this is just a quick breeze through the 4 quadrants. And why I find this so helpful is just to be able to look at anything that we're doing and to see how balanced we are. Are we addressing all 4 of these quadrants? And actually, everything already exists in all 4 quadrants, and sometimes we may put more of an emphasis on certain quadrants, and we may forget or leave out the quadrants. And so I think part of our work as intentional designers, the more we're able to design and include all 4 quadrants with intentionality, I think the more effective we can be. And so this slide shows some examples of how permaculture kind of falls into, or how some of the things that we do fall into the 4 quadrants. And I think permaculture is so strong in the right-hand quadrants, especially in the lower right-hand quadrant. So when we're designing soil food webs or food forests, we're really focusing on ecological systems, and that's the lower right-hand. And equally, when we're designing local currencies or intentional communities, those are social systems, and those are still lower right-hand quadrant projects or foci. And when we look at individual behavior, individual actions, those are really upper right-hand actions. Those are really upper right-hand emphases. And so I think permaculture, we've done an amazing job. I think we've been so effective in these areas, just in terms of being effective in our systems, and also being able to affect and empower individuals in taking action in their own lives and into connecting into larger communities, into larger systems and structures. And I think the part that's been growing maybe in the last 10 years or so is really the left-hand quadrant, so work on the inner landscape, and really about more explicitly bringing the inner landscape into the work that we do, into our courses, into our designs, into our communities. And when we think about the upper left, we can be thinking about things such as, using visualization, imagination, creativity, really encouraging people to bring imagination and intuition explicitly into design. That's really an upper left-hand function. And similarly, in the lower left, some of the structures, some of the things that we can do in the lower right that are visible, we can have group check-ins, we can have listening circles. And these things, if we really hold space for them with intentionality, we really can create and promote more of a culture of inclusion, of respect, of diversity, of creativity, of sharing, of innovation, of really bringing out the beautiful potential that really sometimes lays a little bit just under the surface in our groups. And so, that's that's a lot. And I hope that gives people just a bite-sized, quick kind of bird's eye view of what this tool can point out to us. And I'd like to share a couple of stories from the convergence itself. And these two pictures, I thought these were really great examples of individual action. This is very upper right-hand quadrant. And again, there's, the other quadrants are also present as well. And so the picture on the left side here, it was a flooded pathway. This was the path one of the main paths leading to the dining hall. And it got flooded one day. And these two people took it upon themselves to find tools and to dig these small trenches and drained the water off into the vegetation on the side of the path. So really turning that problem into a solution. And I just thought this was such a beautiful example of self-organizing. And so again, as individuals, the actions that we can take can be such an example. We can be such models for change and for possibility. And I think those are really upper quadrant things. That's really upper right-hand quadrant. And it also takes the awareness, the motivation, and perhaps the self-esteem and the know-how in the upper left quadrant to actually make that happen in the exterior upper right quadrant. And then some other examples here, and I think for me, some of the photos here just highlight some of the most beautiful emergent systems and structures that came out of the International Permaculture Convergence, the time that we spent together at Playa Ibacache. And for me, all of these pictures were such a reminder of how form supports function, how our structures, and especially for me, I think so much of the stories and the examples and what came out of the convergence for me was really around social structures, how our social structures really support outcomes. And the image on the bottom right it's a picture of one of the spontaneous morning meetings that started getting organized. It was a small group of people that started self-organizing and saying, we're having morning meetings right after breakfast and we're going to do them out there. And on this morning in particular, the group was standing as a circle and the circle broke into a spiral. And so basically, if you kind of imagine the circle breaking and then the line starting to lead in and spiral on itself like the snail shell that you see in the image there. And then at some point when we got packed in really tightly, everyone sat down. And I just thought it was such a simple and elegant way of bringing people into a really, really small space so that we could all still see each other and so that we could really hear each other well. And then the picture on the top left, it was from the open space, and there was a small group of people that came together and said, there's 30 or 40 presentations that are being organized every day, and these are great, and we want to create more of a culture of inclusivity. We want to have more space for more voices, people that don't necessarily think of themselves as experts, people that have a lot to share about projects, people that have stories or games or rituals to share, and those weren't actually planned in. Let's do an open space format and let people propose their own topics, their own workshops, their own little gatherings, and they can choose the places, they can choose the time, and people can really choose and follow their own 2 feet and how they want to do that. And then the last picture that I have here was just around the closing sessions, which were put together by they were designed by 3 really experienced facilitators. There were 2 women, Robin Clayfield and Rabina McCurdy and Ron Barazan. And I think they did such a great job of designing all of that, designing the space so that people could see each other and designing it so that there was translation happening and just to make it more accessible linguistically to all of the different people that were there as well. So again, just an example of form and function. And I just want to wrap up in my time with sharing very briefly some things that I'm working on. So this fall I'm going to be launching a new program called Living by Design, and this is something that I've offered here live already, and it's going to be online this fall, and people can choose what they want to contribute. You can choose how much you want to pay for the program. And the program is really about, there's kind of two parts to it. The first part is looking at our lives as individuals and as a society, and really coming to terms with the fact that we are not here forever. So how do we want to live our best lives? How do we want to live our most amazing, beautiful, creative, inspiring lives? And then finally, looking at how do we design that? So knowing what is the best, beautiful, amazing, incredible life that I want to live, using our tools as permaculturists to design those lives, which include our livelihood, our homes, our communities, our projects, our creative endeavors, and looking at possible crises and then ways to actually have backups in place in case any of those crises come to pass. So that's me again. Thank you so much for this time. Thank you to everyone that's out there. I'm really excited just to be sharing this with folks, and I look forward to connecting with more of you. My contact information is here in the middle of the screen, and then on the bottom there's also a link there. So from our website there's a short blog article about the integral permaculture stuff I was talking about, and just watch out for the next permaculture activist. I submitted a much longer article about this piece around integral permaculture and our growing edge in permaculture, so check it out, and I look forward to connecting with more of you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Bonita. That was great to see your reflections.
Thanks.
We're going to go right over to Monica. So, Monica, I'm going to unmute you, and you can go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us your presentation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Monica Ibacache. I was born in Chile, but I live in New York City. I work with do consulting work with Beyond Organic Design. My actual slideshow is going to be on my website. So if you guys would like to see it, it's going to be at beyondorganicdesign.com. I apologize for that. My time in Cuba was very interesting. I had something
Monica, hold on one sec.
Sure.
I just want to make sure Bonita forwards the slide for you to the next slide.
Okay, great. Oh, now I'm looking at it. I see it.
You do? Okay, great.
No, I don't see my slide yet, but that's okay. I'm sure she will be able to forward it in a moment.
Okay, sorry. You can go right ahead.
Okay. And I think the slide that she'll be forwarding is a picture of me working with kindergarten children in the rooftop garden here in New York City and Washington Heights. I was doing an after-school program, and we were composting, and I was having the kindergartners crush up shells with me, which was really, really fun. As I was saying, my time in Cuba was really interesting. I had worked in Guatemala, in the highlands of Guatemala, in the mid-'90s and traveled throughout Central America, and had heard a lot about Cuba in comparisons to the reality that I was in living there. We had 85% of the population below the poverty line, and there it is. Hooray! And very high illiteracy rate, high infant mortality rate, many different factors that you don't want to be high on that list. And the comparison point was also that in Cuba these things were very, very different. So I became fascinated with going to see what at that point, what it seemed like Shangri-La looked like. Even though I knew that they were going through a very intense energy crisis, et cetera, they still managed to keep free healthcare and free education going, and that was kind of impressive. So I went in 2000 with my background as an activist and community organizer doing program development. And then when I went back in 2013, it was as a permaculturist. And I was excited to see the change, the evolution that had happened, and I was even more excited to hear that permaculture had so much to do with it. So a lot of the pictures that I have on my website for the slides are really just about people and a little bit about plants. But just the idea that when we got to the urban garden tour, we had Cuban school children who were there to sing us a welcome song. That's the first picture I have. And it was just such a beautiful moment. Elementary school children, nervous, excited, and I currently work in New York City public schools, and I'm always doing compare and contrast education to the other places that I've lived and been, of education and healthcare and all these other factors of sustainable regenerative life or lack of. And really, really impressed with how in Cuba the permaculture was at so many different levels and it had been embraced by the government. We visited community gardeners, we visited and saw just their ability to be able to be resourceful and border their garden beds with wine bottles, really. That's what they are. They're wine bottles. And his worm bin is an old sink. Because you know what? Why not? Why not? The resourcefulness, the reduce, reuse, recycle, it was absolutely astounding in Cuba. Absolutely astounding. And then also just the general, I've always been impressed by this, that power of the human spirit, how people are able to go through very, very difficult things and still find the joy in life. And at one of our rest stops where the bus was getting gas, we had an elderly Cuban man who came out to show us his garden, which happened to border the gas stop, and give us bananas and just show off his garden. It was really, really, really fantastic. It was so beautiful. I was just really blown away by that in a way. And then we went to a really big farm. And again, when I compare and contrast to other places that I've been, like Guatemala, where I think you guys might have heard about the big giant mudslide, the erosion there in the highlands where I lived is so intense, deforestation, it's just so distinct from what I saw. And I think that when I talk about Cuba, I can only look at it from my point of view as a Latin American immigrant who lives in the U.S. and has had the opportunity to live and travel and work in other parts of Latin America and seeing just the wide variety of difference. I have the slideshow with two Cuban farmers who are working at a big urban farm right outside of the main downtown Havana, and they worked there for a couple of years. Next picture is of the biggest rabbit I've ever seen. It was a New Zealand rabbit, and the lovely young lady is a veterinarian, and she works there. So at this farm, we have veterinarians, we have scientists, we have farmers, we have all these different kinds of people who are working on this farm right outside of downtown Havana, which was just so striking.
Hey, Monica?
Mm-hmm.
Could you just give your website, your URL again? Because it was just a question about where your slides are. So just in case people may.
Sure. It's beyondorganicdesign.com.
Thank you. So her slides are on the website, and they're not actually on the webinar right now. Thank you.
I know. That is completely my fault. So I apologize for that inconvenience for anyone who wants to see the pictures. And then the next 3-4 pictures are of a tour that we did. And one of the things that I learned from a lovely woman who did her PhD dissertation in Malawi, basically observing how communities take on change practices. She was seeing how people would convert, if you want to use the word convert, or start using permaculture design principles and techniques to be able to do their farming. And what I got out of her presentation at IPC was demonstration, demonstration, demonstration. And that is beautiful. So if anybody wants to start a project, whether it's Malawi, the Bronx, Oklahoma, it's about the demonstration. It's a consistent theme. So when we're looking at the picture, me walking up to this farm, and you see what looks like woods or forest ahead of you, and I wasn't really sure what we were doing. I wasn't quite sure where we were going. Later I find out we're walking up the path to this farm by a permaculturist, and his brother owns land, the flat land with very little on it that you see before the farm. So his brother has taken on all these principles, and he's planted all these trees. The next picture is of a banana circle. I'd never seen one in person. I was very impressed. And then the next picture is of his hives, but of his beehives, which were very, very happy bees. There was lots to eat there. And then going back, up to the picture before the banana circle. This is his brother. This is his brother's cows. And this is his land. He tills, he grows in straight rows, and he leaves the soil unmulched, uncovered. And the fertility between that picture and the picture before it, where you see the big tall trees and the banana plants, you can't really, there's no contest which one is working better for production. And arguably, as a permaculturist, for nature. Because when you leave the soil open that way, it's just going to blow or wash away. You can't really continue on with collecting your soil. And then moving on, I took this picture of these high school students because I currently work with a school for 7th to 12th grade. And I just loved it. I loved it. I looked at them. They looked really happy. They were there hanging out, having a soda, dancing at one of the local sites of interest. And I put it up because I feel like oftentimes we don't hear very positive things about Cuba, and it is a place that struggles. It's a place of contradictions. It's a lot of things. But it's still free education and healthcare, and as someone who comes from a place where that has not always been the case in Latin America, just in different countries, I mean, I find that to be really, really crucial. So I have two more. So this is some friends from Michoacan, Mexico, and they're agroecology students, master's students. They were really lovely. They were just had enough money to be there for the conference and the tours. They didn't stay for the convergence. But they had scraped together their money and with their professor and fundraised to be able to come. And I spent some time chatting with them at different points. And I was so impressed by their dedication to their land, their dedication to their heritage as farmers and children of farmers, and their interest in permaculture and coming all the way to Cuba and wanting people to come to Mexico. So these are people who want permaculturists to come to Mexico to work with them and to teach them. And they were just very, very open-hearted and very fun. And then my last picture is going back to what Bonita was saying. The people that I met, the people that I got to see again. And I love this one. We have China, we have Taiwan, we have Austria, Colombia, Cuba, Palestine, India. It was an amazing, amazing experience. Words fail me. And if you can do it once in your life, you know, as powerful as regional convergences are, there's something that's just a little, maybe if you can even say it, more magical by looking at people who don't necessarily look like us and are coming from very different ecosystems and climates and et cetera. And we all, like looking at this picture, it's perfect, like we all are concerned about the state of our planet, the state of our humans, what's going to happen to us, right? And we're all working so hard to be the change that we want to see and to inspire and to facilitate and support and so many other things. So I will stop there. Thank you. If anybody has any
Monica,
questions.
Yeah. Why don't we could do questions now if you have specific questions for Monica. I haven't seen any questions coming in.
Perfect. Then we can. And if they come later, that's fine too.
Great. And I wanted to thank you for talking about the farmers you were saying from Mexico, right?
Yes.
It's because one of my challenges, I guess, is always trying to figure out, like, how do we actually know more about what's going on for people in other countries who are working on the ground with permaculture. And I know when I was writing the article about women in permaculture, I really tried in a short amount of time to throw out as wide a net as I could, and it was really hard to make sure that I could get global majority voices in there. So I think that's a big a place for us as an international permaculture movement to really start working is to strengthen the interconnections. So I didn't know if you or any of the other guests actually have a comment about any of that, any of the other panelists, who want to say anything else about that. Otherwise, we can just put it out there as a question and kind of a challenge for the international movement and keep going.
I'd like to say something. I'd like to say something to that, actually. So with the students that I met from Mexico, there's actually 3 more that aren't in that picture. And we spoke about, I just did a needs assessment. What do you need? Right? So they want a PDC. They want more information because they really have very little. And I spoke with several other people that I knew, and the resources that they have are low. So I spoke with several other teachers, and we talked about what would we need to do to go down there and do a PDC with them. And one is to be able to speak. Somebody needs to speak Spanish. I do. But what we were talking about, too, is that this is very reflective of what I've enjoyed about the NAPC, the North American Permaculture Convergence that I'm helping to organize now, is we're looking at North America, and we're looking at Canada, Mexico, and the U.S., and in my conversations with people in Mexico, it's been so wonderful for me to hear from them. This is what we need. This is what we have. This is what we don't have. And I think that, I can definitely give you a lot of information about that, but also bringing people from Mexico to the North American Permaculture Convergence this summer in Minnesota on Labor Day, or for Canadians or Mexicans, the last weekend of August, because Labor Day means nothing to them. This is one of the opportunities that we can take out of many that we can create, where we're talking to people in the Americas and continuing on with the International Permaculture Convergence, the Latin American Permaculture Convergence, which will happen next year in 2015. Just different ways of being able to connect with people and just do that needs assessment and see what resources we have and figure out how to be best of support and service. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that, Monica. We'll go ahead now to our next presenter, which is going to be Rafter. So, Rafter, I'm going to hand things over to you and let you give a slide deck, I believe, also, right?
Yeah, I do have slides.
Okay, great. Thanks. There you go. I'm trying to get Beatriz Arjona on the call, so I'm working behind the scenes. So I'm going to let you speak while I work on that.
Great. Thanks so much, Karin, for all the work that you put into to organizing this, and thanks also to Monica and Bonita. They were 2 people who it was really great to connect with at the convergence. And helped make it a great event. And I've known Monica for a long time, and it was great, but I hadn't seen her in years, and I had never met Bonita before, and so that's been a real treat, and it's a treat to be on the panel with you now. So I'm Rafter Ferguson. I'm a PhD student at the University of Illinois. I've been involved with permaculture since around 2003 when I took a permaculture design course with Peter Bain and Gustavo Ramirez at a place called Gaia Eco Village in Argentina. And I'm doing my dissertation research about permaculture presently. So I'm just going to talk about a few different kind of sort of takeaway lessons. So for me, were sort of like real watershed kind of realizations or observations at the convergence, both about the kind of international permaculture movement and the domestic scene in the U.S. So next slide. And let's see. Does that work okay, Bonita, for me to just say next slide like that? Let's see if this slide appears to change.
Yes, that works for me. That totally works for me.
Okay, great. Well, I think there's a little bit of a delay before it oh, look, there it is. So that was great. Okay, so here we have the Habana Libre Hotel in Havana. This is the site of the sort of 3-day conference at the beginning of the convergence. And I wanted to say just how impressed I was with what the Cuban permaculturists were able to pull off with like a real shoestring budget and I think like a single dial-up internet connection. I mean, it was, it's 400 people in the room, and there were like plenty of logistical challenges, throughout the week, but it was also a pretty incredible achievement, and the hosting organization, the Antonio Núñez Jiménez Foundation for Nature and Humanity, I think it was really a coup that they were able to put it on in this way. And so my justification for going was, partially was to present about my work trying to rebuild some bridges between permaculture and scientific research. And so part of what was really amazing for me going there is actually to meet researchers from the U.S. and internationally who are working on related issues. I've often felt, a little bit isolated in doing this work, definitely very supported by permaculturists and sometimes very generously supported is when I crowdfunded just to support my field research. And I'm very grateful to the folks who've helped me do my field research. But not necessarily feeling like I had a sort of fellow workers sort of in the trenches of dealing with academia and dealing with research and also trying to do research about permaculture. And so meeting, Abby Conrad from DC, who's actually Monica mentioned her work earlier. She's been doing this amazing work with smallholder farmers in Malawi and what happens in terms of food security and nutritional diversity when they adopt permaculture. Hugo Oliveira from Portugal, who's working on analyzing land use change in places where permaculturists are managing the land. And of course, Andy Goldring, who's not himself a researcher, but he's the head of or executive director or some similar position of UK permaculture, and he's really trying to steer that organization from being primarily educational to being more of a research organization, and is doing really great work around that. And so it was incredible to connect with folks around that particular part of the puzzle. And so I was going to present in kind of building off a systematic review of the permaculture literature that got published last fall, sort of from the perspective of agroecology, so looking specifically at kind of agricultural issues, not so much at architecture or, forest management or things like that. Just identifying points of support and disagreement between permaculture and the scientific literature, so we can improve our game, and learn as fast as we need to learn. Next slide.
I'm going to try Rafter, so I'm having a bit of a tech moment here. Keep going.
No problem. The part of that was building off that review and then also proposing the idea of people science, where we build a culture of experimentation and critical thinking, where we sort of we appropriate resources of contemporary scientific knowledge and research methods and integrate them into our sort of grassroots movement for the liberation of people and of our home, the earth. And kind of putting that out there in a sort of very rough and preliminary way, saying, hey, this is a direction that we can move in and develop within the permaculture movement. And the next slide, when it does come up,
which slide are you looking for, Rafter? Because I'm not sure.
The cartoon?
Yeah, that one's on. Did you see it now?
Okay, it hasn't showed up on mine yet, but mine, I think, has been a little bit behind on other points, too. So it's probably showing up for some folks now. That cartoon is from an article that's sort of built out of that talk that will be showing up in the next issue of Permaculture Activist. And you can see most of that talk on my website patched together from video from a few different folks. And because part of my mission was to sort of criticize some permaculture dogma and propose moving away from some traditions and towards some new ways of doing things, I expected it to be a little bit more controversial than it ended up being. I ended up feeling very well supported in doing it. it ended up really feeling like the most successful talk I'd ever given. And so that was incredibly encouraging. Next slide, actually. And that's sort of one of the takeaway lessons for me was that for whatever reason, I kind of went into the convergence. It turned out to be a little bit pessimistic about sort of what the state of the conversation would be about a bunch of sort of thorny issues in terms of relationship with scientific research, political economic issues like capitalism and alternatives to capitalism. And are we looking for like green capitalism, or are we looking for to build alternatives to it or replace it entirely? Permaculture sort of, particularly these international convergences of this history of kind of resisting any effort towards institutionalization or kind of formalizing any kind of network, and resistance to kind of what it takes to really scale up. And so I went in a little bit pessimistic about those things, and was actually really gratified to find that things were actually people were having like really great conversations, really great critical conversations. Of course, it's a diverse group, and people were all over the place in terms of what their personal orientation was. But the overall, I was really like pleasantly surprised and sort of realized it's like, oh, I guess I was kind of coming in with like my expectations set too low. Next slide, please. And sort of zooming in on some of that question was a watershed all in itself is just to encounter the work of Movement Generation, this organization out of Oakland. And this slide is a picture of Mateo Nube and Carla Perez from Movement Generation, and then a slide from one of their presentations is sort of in the middle there. Also in that delegation is Ellen Choi and some other folks whose names, unfortunately, I've forgotten. And I think that Movement Generation is just one of the most important permaculture organizations in the industrialized world. And they're really very little known in the permaculture world. They've sort of seamlessly integrated permaculture and community organizing, both as a pedagogy and as like a practice. And a lot of it is about sort of reframing permaculture's positive action focus and relating it to this sort of earth care ethic with this idea of restore our labor, which to me is just this amazing concept of observing the fact that it's generally folks without a lot of economic resources, folks without a lot of political power, who do the actual physical work involved in degrading the environment, right? Because of dispossessed and marginalized people who have very few choices about who they sell their labor to in order to survive. To approach permaculture while respecting the constraints that most of the world is under politically and economically, knowing that as long as there are people who have to take whatever work that they can get, corporations will be able to find workers to do their dirty work, and helping people get free from wage slavery so they can stop selling their labor to these brutal corporations. And also doing that in a permaculture way where you're helping people participate directly in producing what they need to survive as part of that liberation struggle. It's just like, I think these folks are super important. Like they're really thought leaders for 21st century permaculture. Next slide. And also sort of, another big takeaway for me was seeing what permaculture looks like, how it shows up in people's lives outside of the U.S., outside of the industrialized world. And in the U.S., for a lot of reasons, for a lot of like very real constraints, permaculture, even among, people who are devoted to it, is not always fundamental to how people are really getting their needs met. It's a lifestyle thing in some ways, or a community-oriented thing. And that's not necessarily bad, but it's a stage, it's a phase where we're at. And to go to Cuba, did I say next slide after the Movement Generation slide? Okay, great. So to be able to listen to like this campesino farmer talk about how profound the adoption of permaculture has been for him and his family, and how completely applicable it is to his situation, this was like really transformative. Things that I expected intellectually to find, but I realized on some level doubted because I just hadn't seen them. And to see how, like, outside of industrialized economies, permaculture is helping people to directly meet their needs for themselves, for their households, and in cooperation with their neighbors and their communities. It's just a big, it's really something to see that, to have more direct evidence of that. And that was also, by the way, supported in encountering Abby Conrad and her work with the smallholders in Malawi. That's also very inspiring stuff for that same exact reason. Next slide. And then in Havana, I see I'm going over time a little bit, so I'll see if I can just zoom through this. So with in Havana, even in places like this urban garden, where it's clearly a multifunctional social space, it's not about bulk food production, but you see the integration of permaculture with fundamental social issues in this really explicit and intentional way, where you have, signs like we might expect to see in a permaculture garden anywhere, where one of the signs here says, nature is our home and our home is in nature, right? But you also see, we permaculturists are against gender violence and no to violence against women and family, and yes to loss of love. And when the Cuban permaculturists, it turns out, when they consider a new urban garden site, they first they do work to find out what are the social issues impacting the neighborhood around that garden, and they create social themes for the garden that respond to those conditions. And so, and to me, that's just to see that integration, to see how it's all woven together in practice in this like matter of fact and matter of course way, where it's just sort of systematically these issues are part of permaculture. Is just to see that as an alternative is extremely inspiring, and to me seems like the direction that we can move in and we can all sort of take leadership from. Next slide. So.
And Rafter, this is Karen. I just want to say you don't need to speak through. We've got plenty of time, so, take your time with it. The other thing is, folks who are online listening through the web, if you could just type something in the questions, or if you have a comment that you want to say, you can also type that in. We can't hear your voice, but I want to invite you to interact that way. Go back to you, Rafter. Sorry about that.
So just, I guess sort of like the big takeaways for me are, one, just in terms of, in a way that's, I don't know, in some ways sort of like personal. It's about the work to which I'm addressing myself day in and day out of this sort of permaculture and science relationship, is to see, is actually just to see that the permaculture movement, in terms of folks who are able to make it to, this international convergence, to see how much I'm actually on the same page with more people than I realized, that a lot of folks are very interested in that and sort of ready for that. And that's just very, very encouraging. And, I knew that I felt like it was a good idea and that I had some support from folks, but, it's just to see, it's broader. It's like the movement is in a different place than I thought it was at. And that's just great. And that ended up being true about a bunch of different things in terms of how people are thinking about political and economic issues. And then just in encountering thought leaders like Movement Generation and like sort of leaders in practice like the Cuban permaculturists is just, to me, is really inspiring, and it's so great to, in the U.S. we face such a very specific set of constraints, a very specific set of conditions in terms of culture, in terms of like our completely fragmented cultural fabric, where we don't really, it's very rare to have communities where there's really these like bonds of reciprocity and mutual aid, and commodities are really cheap and labor is really expensive compared to commodities, right? So it's almost always cheaper somehow to work for a wage and buy your food at Costco or Walmart than it is to grow your food yourself, right? And it's we face this very particular situation, and then it's easy to just miss how differently permaculture is showing up in the majority world, where people are facing conditions that are not at all like what we're doing here. And so that's just been very helpful for me in sort of like renewing and re-energizing my faith and my commitment. Maybe faith isn't even the right word, but just my confidence that, oh yeah, this is really worthwhile stuff that we're working on here in all these different directions. And that's pretty much it.
Rafter, thanks so much. I was thinking we might open up for you and Monica and Bonita to just kind of have a conversation right now. We unfortunately haven't been able to figure out the technical difficulties so that we can hear from our friend Beatriz, who's in Colombia. So I don't think she's listening in, I know that much, but we can't figure out how to give her access to actually talk. And our dear friend Pandora Thomas has been traveling and is in really high demand, and so needed to do some self-care today, which I strongly support. I shared with her that in the town that I live in, the people of color who are all crossing that bridge between social justice and environmental, activism or permaculture or whatever, they are in very high demand and stretched super thin. So I was like, oh, Pandora, take a day off, get a rest. Don't feel like you have to be here. And I think that's really important for all of us. Myself as a person of privilege, you want to create space, but you want to also realize that people who are those, really bold edge walkers are wanted by everybody. So I applaud self-care by anyone. So unfortunately, we won't have those two wonderful people here, and I just thought this was a chance for several things to happen. One, if we wanted to have a conversation as panelists. Two, if you're on the phone and you would like to ask a question, you could raise your hand. And to raise your hand, you would press *2, and then I can unmute you. Or we could also go over to a different format where it could be looser. But I just want to see what we want to do first. If you're on the web, again, we can't hear you speak if you haven't called in via the phone, but you could type in a comment or on the Q&A, and I can try to moderate that. So I'm just going to kind of open it up to what folks, especially the panelists, think would be best now.
Were there any questions that came in via the web?
I have a comment from Sachko, who is actually, I had the privilege of working with Sachko when she was at Ibacache College. She's now in Sweden studying, but she said, my concern towards permaculture was big towards the lack of scientific research. So really looking forward to reading Permaculture for Agroecology. Wonderful work, and thanks for sharing.
Thanks very much.
Amen.
Another person said, Rafter, you've captured the energy of the IPCs. I've been going to them since 2005, and you learn so much when you share and meet with the rest of the permaculture world. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's it so far. So I'm going to just, and no hands are raised. So I'm just going to open it up for you folks to have any conversation you want to have.
Monica, you've been working really hard, and not alone, but also, exerting so much effort yourself, on organizing the first North American permaculture convergence ever, as far as I know. And so I would love to just actually hear a little bit more about both what that's been like, or what can we expect there, and also Why do you think now? Why never before, but now?
Okay. Well, I would be very happy to talk about it. You asked me so many questions, and I will do my best to answer them. The North American Permaculture Convergence that we have been organizing was born from the desire of, I want to say, my generation of permaculturists, my wave of permaculturists in Jordan in IPC 2011. I had such an amazing experience there. I said, what? Why aren't we doing this in the States? This is amazing. And I had already done the regional convergence, the Northeast regional convergence, which is fantastic, of course. Mm-hmm. And I was so excited. I just said, so I did an open space, and then some lovely people came through, some people that you all know and love, Marco Barrantes, Ryan Harb, Ethan Rowland was there. It was great, and we just started talking about it. And it was really interesting because we also had some of the elders there, Wes Rowe, Starhawk, and they were holding the history of NAPCs and kind of just the gathering, permaculture gatherings. And from them I was able to glean that there had been a second IPC had been in Washington State. I believe this was in the 80s. So it was an IPC that happened to be in the U.S. It wasn't exactly just a regional North American convergence. It was an IPC. So it's people from all over the place. And then I heard that there was something gathering that had happened in Santa Fe, but it was mainly designers and teachers, and I think this was in the 90s. But like you said, it is the first. It's never happened. Not a North American permaculture convergence. And it's happening under 10 months from when we left Cuba, which is kind of a world record. And perfect is perfect. I'm like, we're building the plane while we're flying it. It's been quite a ride. So all I have to say is, don't judge us. We tried really hard. And with everything that we have been able to do. And the website is up, NorthAmericanPermaculture.org or NAPC 2014. So we have an early bird special. Buy your tickets. And the idea is that we wanted to do something different because there have been other conferences and gatherings. And what we wanted to do with this was it wasn't so much about the speaker-listener model. We wanted to have more of an open space. Well, we wanted to use open space technology. We're also looking at using World Cafe and having a lot of panel discussion. Because like what Bonita had brought up before, we're all experts. We all have something to share. We all have something to contribute. And we all need to be leaders, I feel like, because we have some great, knowledgeable leaders, absolutely, but they don't live in our block. They don't live in our building. They don't live in our town necessarily. And I mean permaculture leaders. So we kind of have to be our own leaders. And in order to do that, you can be naturally gifted and just know how to do it. I personally need to learn and be trained and talk to other people and read and ask. And it's about organizing. It's about communication. It's about us coming together as a movement, sowing the seeds, visualizing, strategizing, and saying, how are we going to add what's already out there? There's so much that's already out there. I want to see permaculture integrated into environmental, social justice, economic justice movement because, as we know, it is everything. It's so general. It's like the lens through which we can see the world, and it brings so much to anything. I feel like it brings so much to the economic movement, economic justice movement. And I talk about these movements because they're the ones that I'm the most familiar with. That's why I'm glad we've got you here to do the science-centered things. And, but that's kind of what I know about. And I feel like the time is now. The time is now. We have to do this. We all know the state of the world. We all know what's happening. We all know that our lives are in peril. It'll fix itself. It'll throw some moss over us. But really, it'll take care of itself. But it's about us. It's about our children. It's about our grandchildren. It's about my grandparents. Luckily, one of them is still around. It's about all of us here and now in the future. And the NAPC will be an opportunity for us to come together and talk and say hi and say, what are we going to do? And I'm so excited because we have such a rich wealth of resources and people all over the world. And I look forward to seeing the North Americans there and seeing what we can do. One of the things that I've noticed is a lot of us tend to recreate the wheel. So the NAPC website looks to be a resource center so we can plot people's projects. We can say you can go on there and look and be like, oh, I'm interested in starting a garden in my community. Well, there's a lot of people who've already done it. This is what they did. This is what they came up against. This is what really worked. And just to create a clearinghouse collection of knowledge that we can continue it after the conference is over. So I said a lot. I hope I answered at least one of your questions.
Well, you did, and we have a couple folks also writing in from the web, so I wanted to read those questions. So Beatriz, our guest who we can't unfortunately hear.
Beatriz, we love you.
I know. Hi. Oh, pobrecita.
She's asked, from what you're talking about, whether that's International Permaculture Convergence or the Northeastern one, she's interested in hearing about how we can improve the Latin American convergences, and there's one happening in June 2015 in Colombia, and then we have another
it's in June.
Related question.
I thought it was in January.
She wrote here June, so she could write in again and let us know if that was wrong.
No, it could be. It could have been changed. I haven't seen her since Cuba.
And also, Elias from Mexico City is asking, he's excited to connect with the convergences. He hasn't been able to attend them, but where and when are the next ones? And
does he mean NAPC or does he mean Mexico?
I think let's just brainstorm all the ones that we have that we know about.
And anyone is welcome to email me at monica@beyondorganicdesign.com with your questions, or send it to me on Facebook, or join our North American Permaculture Convergence group. I'd be happy to answer all questions also in detail that way. Awesome. So, all right, so Beatriz wants to know how to support the Latin American convergence, right?
Yeah, how to improve, what's the strengths and weaknesses? Like,
well,
what
I can tell you that I'm going to have learned a lot.
Sorry.
No, just that. I mean, I think that there is a woman, I'm trying to remember her name, I don't know if anybody else here remembers it, that she sent out a beautiful document on permaculture convergence organizing after Cuba. And unfortunately it's in English, but Beatriz speaks it. She'll be able to read it. Or maybe I'm going to write a note to myself to send that to her. And I think that that's what we can do. I mean, if that's what she's asking for, tell her that in September and October, we'll be putting together, Beatriz, we're going to put together a report, and you will be able to see right then and there what worked, what did not work, and we can combine it with other convergences, whether it's regional or national, and just, I think the patterns will emerge, and we'll be able to figure it out, and it will definitely be shared with you and everyone else because it's going to be on our website.
There's just maybe 3 patterns that I would like to point out just from the convergences and the gatherings that I've been to that I think have worked really well. One was, so certainly the open space technology and the World Cafe, those kinds of formats I think really allow for a lot more inclusivity, spontaneity. I just love the idea of really allowing the participants on the spot to propose something that's really alive and bubbling for them, or to collaborate on something that they're really excited about. So I think that's something that I would design that into a convergence straight from the get-go. Another thing which I have seen at other or heard about from other convergences and gatherings are actually times that are designed in for regional networking. So not just for, like, this is something that we as the Canadians, we did. We had 2 meetings on the side, and a number of us said, oh no, we're going to miss that workshop or that presentation from so-and-so. And I've heard that other convergences, you know, it could be the last day, maybe the whole morning is just for meeting with the people from your region, whether that's your province or your country or your bioregion or whatever that is, so that people can really go deeper in those, in talking about how to support local projects, local guilds, local groups. And the third thing was really around just money and accessibility. And this is something that really stood out for me at different points in the convergence at Cuba, and particularly towards the end. So for myself as a Canadian who is kind of, you know, like middle class, and going to Cuba was expensive for us, but we could handle it. And when some things didn't work out, you know, Rafter kind of mentioned just kind of the logistical challenges that came up at different points, and how, you know, I think like the group of us that descended onto Playa Ibacache was probably I'm guessing the largest group that they've seen in that site, and just it was a huge challenge logistically. And I think for those of us who may be more, I guess I came from a very Canadian perspective of, oh, well, I'm expecting that if we say that there's going to be 3 meals a day and that it's going to be at these times, we're going to do it at these times. And so some of us got to learn that, oh, well, actually, mealtime, we're going to stand in line and actually get to connect and network with other people. And another perspective that came in for me towards the end was actually not having this perspective as a person of privilege. People from other countries whose currencies are worth a lot less, who have less financial means, it was a big deal for some people to get there. It took them months of savings to get there, and it was actually a disappointment for some people when the logistics did break down and some people had to miss half day of garden tours because the logistics weren't planned out. And so I guess for me it comes back down to, with any sort of big organizing, just to really try and make it, to start simple, you know, to keep it simple, start small, so that just to have less possibilities of breakdowns and to make it more accessible to people. You know, are there ways that it can be designed at the beginning of the convergence that just really perhaps, you know, people from groups, from countries that have more financial resources, could we be doing more fundraising? Could we, through our other local convergences or through other events or through our courses, have a small donation fund where we're gathering money and being able to sponsor folks from countries of the global majority whose currency is worth less and it's harder for them to travel? So just some ideas of making it a little bit more inclusive and making it a little bit more accessible to more people.
Thanks, Bonita. I want to follow up on that. First of all, I want to let Deborah Conrad, who's on the phone, know I see your hand is up, and I will get to you. I just wanted to follow up on this one thread and then see if you have a different question. And we have several questions also in the Q&A list. A few more things to that topic that I think are strengths and weaknesses and things to think about. One is really good attention to childcare. You know, if we have good models, so, you know, if it's paid, often childcare is unpaid, or parents are, you know, bearing the brunt and not being able to attend, or, you know, some places kids are welcome in presentation, some places not. Really to have those conversations, especially so that the brunt of cost isn't borne by parents. You know, that there could be, you know, an extra optional surcharge for each person who registers for $5 extra that goes towards the child care fund, to pay child care providers who can be part of the community, or it can be self-organized and cooperative. I mean, there's also, you know, that whole safety issue of, I never wanted to leave my kids with somebody I didn't actually know, or, you know, can they be, if I don't know the person, can they be in the room right nearby so I can actually have my eye on everything? You know, there's, to be able to participate at a high level at any kind of thing, if your child is there, there's a lot going on. So to really be thoughtful and talking with parents about what would make it possible for them. And along that same thing is, I'm sure Monica can testify, and I helped organize the Women's Permaculture Convergence for the Northeast. And there's just a huge amount of organization.
Amazing.
And Bonita's you're on the steep group for next year, right?
No, I'm not.
Oh, I thought you were. Okay.
No.
So, but it's a huge amount, and I thought maybe you were experiencing that right now, like cellularly. It's a huge amount of work, and to figure out also how to, keep track of your hours and figure out if there's going to be some kind of remuneration. Because one of the patterns I talk about is that often it's women doing a lot of organizing work or a lot of hands-on-the-ground work, and that's often unpaid. So I just want us to start thinking about those models. The other thing is with presenters. If it's open space, one thing we found at our conferences is that we get to an open space, and myself included, sometimes you'd think, wow, if I had prepped this more at home, it would have been more effective use of all of our time. So, ways to really support people to, yes, you can be flexible and spontaneous and come in with your, open space topic, or you can prep it, especially think about what do you want to move forward and how do you gather that information, because there's so much going on at conferences. One last thing is I've been at conferences where people of color spontaneously, especially if they're we're living okay, I'm in North America, so people of color are typically not the majority of people in the room. And I know that when they have self-organized to say we're going to have a people of color Congress, and this is the time for us to get together and have a conversation, that has been hugely powerful, not just for that group, but for the whole group. So I just thought that was really important for me to see, and really want to support that. I'm going to give it a chance to see if anybody else wants us to comment about strengths and weaknesses, about organizing around big events and convergences, and then we'll go on to the next question. How about that?
Karen, I wanted to respond about the child care. One of the first things I said about when I joined the group when we did our open space and talking about visualizing what an NAPC would look like, was that I wanted to make sure that we had a child care option, but not just a child care, permaculture, not instruction, but a permaculturally influenced, child care program. And that is, I did an amazing training with Mother Earth school in Portland, Oregon. They're the leaders in how to teach children permaculture, and they really were so inspiring for me that I have created a track on this, and also for this, so that the kids will be doing things and will be active and interested and engaged. And I'm so excited to be able to provide this. And no extra. It's not like an extra if you have a child kind of a thing. It just comes with a ticket. And then the other part is that I don't remember. Let's go on to the next question.
That's great. And let's see, anyone else want to respond to that whole thing, strengths and weaknesses of conferences, or our next convergences? So we know that there's one in Colombia, because Beatriz told us, but are there other convergences that folks know about?
I think one other thing I would add, just kind of another pattern, was having elders present. So, and for me, maybe it's two patterns. One is continuity, so just being able to hold a thread of continuity, whether it's between convergences or threads of connection between different regions, different countries, and also having elders there. A lot of our elders were there, and that for me was the first time meeting quite a number of them, and being able to, you were talking before about leaders and pioneers and elders in social permaculture. Another one that stands out is Robin Clayfield. It was amazing to meet Robin, and meet Robin Francis, and meet Rabina McCurdy, and to really have time with those women. And I think the other benefit of having elders there is, so not only can they carry and share some of the history of the community, they also they're a wealth of knowledge and experience, and just to be able to have the perspective of what has how has this movement shifted and unfolded and evolved and changed in the last 30 years, and how has it not, right? So what has been steady, what has been strong, and what are our growing edges from a 30-year perspective? It's a much bigger perspective than for someone like myself who's only been, in this movement for maybe 10, 15 years, for example. So elders, for
Definitely.
sure. Elders and threads of continuity.
That's great. And one thing, of course, I'm obliged to even just mention, I don't think it applies as much in open space, but I think we should have it on our radar. It's just this whole pattern we see that, 50% or more of people who enroll in PDCs are women, and often, especially, when you get to the big, well-known level, it's mostly men. And that, I want to just reiterate, that's nobody's fault. It's a systemic thing that we're all swimming in.
Yeah.
But one of the patterns in the pattern language article about women in permaculture that I put out there is commit to having at least 30% people to be women on anything that we participate in, whether it's a board, whether it's a panel, things like that. And that's only because that's the stepping stone to parity, which is 50%. But that's something to really keep in mind, and is important, and especially when we're, hosting talks. I think the open space technology lends itself more. I wonder.
I have one more pattern, Karen. Sorry.
Please do. Yes.
The last one was, I was just thinking about, so again, along the lines of accessibility is language. So translators, and I think probably for a Latin American, a South American convergence, that may not be as much of an issue. And I think especially for the North American convergence, there might be people that come that only speak Spanish or people that only speak French. And so especially for sessions that are meant to be for the entire group, I think it would be really imperative to have translators for at least those three languages, or, it could be simultaneous translation, or it could be small groups on the side kind of getting support from someone that's bilingual or trilingual. But again, just thinking about that kind of a structure, how language can get in the way, because if there isn't simultaneous translation, that was something that we did see in Cuba, was that if somebody is kind of doing whispering translation, they're 30 seconds behind. And so if the speaker says any questions, it's going to be an Anglophone that gets up who is going to put their hand up or stand up to speak first. So it's just, again, structurally, if we don't design that in, then people who are not of the majority, the language that the main presentations, the main discussions are happening in, if we're not of that linguistic majority, we are structurally being marginalized as well.
Great point. And I think about, places I've lived like India or Africa, where there's like countless numbers of languages, not just the dominant languages, and, how much richer it is, again, for all of us if we get to hear what all these amazing languages look like. And really, I think it goes back to, as an international movement, as a movement in general in our home communities, how are we honing the skills that we need to have, great facilitation skills, great conflict management skills, all the things that we need to really create an inclusive community where everyone feels honored and invited.
Absolutely.
We can come back to this topic. I was thinking did someone want to say something?
I just wanted to say that and these are the kinds of things we'll be harvesting and putting on the website, because these are the very important aspects to organizing. And designing is a skill, organizing is another. There's much we can learn from each other. And I think that when you're looking in terms of diversity, how you're looking to achieve diversity is also really important, which you guys have all already brought up. And I wanted to say that in order to create this, I really encourage everybody to make their voices be heard. And Beatriz, I'm sure you're going to do this also, but just put the call out. Like, I'm putting the call out. We need people for the NAPC. We need people who want to work with program. We need people who want to be on the different committees. We have a diversity committee. We have the child program committee, and I'll have a lot of teachers on there. So we have a lot of different committees, and the only way we can do this is if people feel empowered enough to speak. So please, we need you all to speak. Let your voices be heard. Thank you.
Great. Just because we are about 10 minutes away from the end, I wanted to unmute Deborah Conrad. Deborah, did you have a question you wanted to ask the panelists? Hopefully you can hear me now.
Hi, yeah, I did. This is Abby Conrad.
Yay!
And hi. Deborah's my mom. So I was wondering if you guys could talk a little about how you think the North American permaculture convergence can help work with the international movement, and maybe generally how the regional movements or meetings can connect internationally. So something some of the delegates from Africa talked about in Cuba, like Julius from Zimbabwe and Eston from Malawi, that they felt like there was a lot more energy around the regional meetings, and they didn't necessarily feel like, they weren't sure how does that fit in with the international movement, and are you sidelining maybe some regions that don't have the resources to do those kinds of regional meetings, and who don't have the technology to really access those conversations.
So Julius was at the Northeast Convergence when he was here, and I don't remember quite what year it was. Maybe it was after I met him, so it would have been 2012. So he went to the one in Eastern Massachusetts, I think. I was in New York City, came here afterwards. So I'm not quite sure if I understand, so I'm going to let other people answer, and then I'll see if I'm getting it.
Rafter, is there anything you'd like to
Well, I just love that question. And hi, Abby. One of my sort of main interests in the sort of North American convergence is so that we can try and like move towards that level of coordination where we have where we're talking to sort of federations of permaculture organizations from other parts of the world, and seeing how we can like sort of coordinate our strategies and coordinate our where we're putting resources, because certainly there's an abundance of resources are flowing in and around the permaculture movement in North America. It doesn't always feel like an abundance to us, in part because of there are still real constraints on a lot of us in terms of our economic capacity, but also just because it's easy to forget how little people have in other places when it's not when it's not up in our faces. And so and I don't have I don't really at this point have great answers to that question, but I think that's I guess to me the way forward is always some kind of like systematic listening project. Whenever you're talking about trying to coordinate across some kind of some rift or some wound in the social fabric where there's inequality, if you're trying to work across a legacy of colonialism or race and class divides or a gender divide, then it's got to start with a lot of listening, a lot of sort of systematic listening. And so I think in the at the NAPC, at the North American Convergence, if we can talk about, okay, how do we actually like build on the connections that we have, the sort of rich connections that we already have with permaculturists in other parts of the world, and sort of and listen, set ourselves up to really systematically listen to what is going on and what the needs are and what are the things that we could help address. How could we be a support in terms of fostering fostering capacity and for folks to build the permaculture movement that they need in the place where they are, you know?
Yeah. Abby, can you explain to me sidelining? Because I think that's what threw me. I didn't really understand what that means.
Sorry, what did you want me to explain?
I said it was the last part of what you asked that threw me. Thank you, Rafter. That was amazing. You took the words right out of my mouth. You were saying about sidelining and lacking of energy, and I don't really know what that means, aside from the obvious that a Northeast Convergence is going to have 600 people that aren't going to all travel from the Northeast to go internationally for many reasons. So I don't know what you mean.
I guess I think Rafter definitely touched on what I was asking. Just that I think it's more feasible to organize on a regional level, you know, and so a lot of people were working to do that. And I was just asking about, if you guys had ideas about how the regional organizations and movements can connect internationally as well, because I think that's it's a challenge, you know, how to actually figure out a way to do that.
And so I have a thought to add to that. Hi, Abby. This is Bonita. So I think for me, I would, and I think this has been kind of a question that's been floating around about the North American permaculture convergence, especially being so close on the heels of Cuba, people kind of asking, like, how do we justify traveling for this? And I personally have chosen not to travel for it. I'm not planning on going to the North American convergence. I'm sad about that. And for me, it still makes the most sense for me to be to be as much place based as I can be, and because this is where my community is. And so I think for me, the priority in general would be to focus as much as possible on regional organizing. It can be simple. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big event that requires a lot of money. It could just be it can be simple. That would be my first priority, and that's where I'm putting my energies this year, is in our bioregion, in our local permaculture communities, and then kind of rippling out from that center, the place where we have the most influence, the place where we have the most commonalities, kind of like Rafter was saying too. I think if we organize more in our regions, then we know more of what our region needs, and we know more the uniqueness of the challenges that we have in our region. And then connecting into the larger communities, I think there's so much value in that. And of course there's a big question of, well, how do we get people there? You know, just the flights and well, I think that's probably the big thing, is transportation to get people there, the cost of that. And so the other idea that's been kind of bubbling, and I've kind of voiced in a couple of conversations, and I would love to see someone run with it in this next year or two, would be to have more international meetup calls, kind of like this, but actually have more of a conference call format where a lot of people can be talking and in small groups. So to have international permaculturists meet, but not have that hurdle of actually, can we afford to send a delegate overseas and meet with these other people, and really seeing the value of that, but we can't get over that hurdle of transportation. So can we use the technology that we have available to us? And again, I know in some places in the world, the internet access is not so great or not so reliable, and probably, it's probably still worth giving it a shot. It would be cheaper. I think it would be easier to organize. What if we were to have 2 meetings a year for international delegations to come together and share and talk about what's happening in the international movement, and those can also feed into the regional, the national, and the international convergences. I think that could be simpler to organize and a lot cheaper, and probably a lot more accessible to more people.
This is Karen. I'd love to just follow up on that too. I so resonate with what you're saying, and I think it's really important that we start thinking of ways, to be able to connect with other people in the world. I know, I say, my joke is I live in an eco-village, but I always thought I'd be living in a village in Africa. And I really miss not knowing what permaculture looks like in Africa and with women. And it is not going to be a time right now where my family and I are going to travel a lot. And so, it's like, how do we get, like you said, reports back from the field of what people are really doing, what they're thinking about. And I think I would encourage the, people of the global majority to start also framing the pattern language for themselves and letting the greater movement know, like, this is what you can do to support our wider engagement. So that it's being articulated really from the source. It's going to be most effective, and it will be easiest to integrate into other things. So I think that's a great idea. Deborah, if you're finished, I'm going to mute you. Or Abby, sorry.
I was so laughing. I was like, is that her mom?
You must be calling my mom. So thank you so much for calling in. That was great. We do have a few other questions, and we are at time. So I wanted to just see where we're at with our panelists. And
I'm okay to stay a few more minutes.
No, I'm totally okay. In fact, and I wanted to respond to some of the things that you guys are saying. So also.
And maybe while we're just continuing, I think what I would like to do is I'm going to circle through a couple of the slides that we missed because we didn't have Beatriz, we didn't have Pandora, and I think the slide presentation pooped out when I got to the end of mine, so I'm not sure if people got my contact information. So while we're chatting, I'm just going to quietly in the background go through those so people can read those and get contact info. Yeah.
That's great. One thing somebody wrote says, unless it's been said, please tell people Happy International Permaculture Day.
Happy International Permaculture Day.
That's
Indeed.
right, Jillian. Our friend Jillian in Australia is big behind that.
Oh yeah, really?
Well, I just want to say I do need to get going. And thanks to everybody so much, and we're looking forward to talking with you all again soon.
Do you have time for one question, Rafter?
Sure. Yeah.
Sachko again wrote asking, what do you think are the main barriers towards scientific research in permaculture? And how is the process of writing your paper? So maybe you pick one of those, depending on how limited your time is.
Would you actually just repeat that just a little bit slower?
I can try. I think what are the barriers to scientific research in permaculture? And then the other was, how is the process of writing your paper? I would love to hear about the barriers to scientific research.
Okay. Well, it's like, well, what do we mean when we say, scientific research in permaculture? Because there's a few different ways that can be that can sort of show up, and one is that scientific research about practices that are relevant to permaculture or practices that permaculture has adopted, of which there's actually a ton, and that's a lot of what my that paper is based on, is looking specifically in the agroecology literature and sort of literature closely related to agroecology and saying, okay, what's distinctive about permaculture in terms of what permaculture is proposing, and what it's emphasizing and how it's framing practice and design, and then how well is that supported in the literature? And so that there's a lot more of that could be done. We could really dig into in terms of finding the sort of parallels and corollaries and sort of related fields, and sort of systematically assessing, okay, now where does what we're proposing stand in relation to what's there, to what's already out there in the literature, just not being called permaculture. And so that's one piece, and there's no barrier to doing that other than finding folks who are interested in doing it and have the time to do it, and who have access to scientific journals. And so sometimes that actually can be a huge barrier, because if you're not connected with the university, then accessing peer-reviewed journals can be really hard. Another piece of that is let's see, well, permaculture itself showing up in peer-reviewed literature, and being referred to by name, and there's been a big bottleneck around that for a long time, because if you're going to be bringing something into peer review, you want to be justifying that in terms of previous literature, and so I think there's been a bottleneck, and there's actually been a lot of graduate work, graduate level research about permaculture that never got through peer review, or maybe I'm not sure if those folks even tried. But I think one of the barriers there is that there's no previous scientific literature about permaculture to cite in doing that. And so that was sort of both the necessity and an inspiration for doing the systematic review of saying, okay, if I approaching this in a particular way, of a particular quantitative way of looking at the existing permaculture literature and saying, okay, these are how many things have been published, this is where they've been published, these are the topics, and sort of kind of generating sort of data about permaculture literature, that was a way to get through that bottleneck. And there's also a couple other papers that have been published recently that are specifically referring to permaculture, and so I feel like we're actually in the process of kind of busting through that bottleneck, because there's going to be more and more things that we can cite as justification for researching permaculture. And and then the other piece is permaculturists actually sort of doing science, right? And the barriers to that are just the around, and when I say doing science, I mean sort of any kind of really systematic investigation, right? And we don't need big institutions to do. We don't need trained scientists, but there are some kinds of questions that the resources and the sort of technical skills of those institutions become really useful for. And this is sort of getting into that kind of people's science perspective that the permaculture activist article will be addressing. And the barriers to that are just really continuing the sort of pathway that I see permaculture having been developing along, where there's a little bit less of treating the classic permaculture texts like gospel, and a little bit more focus on sort of kind of ecological literacy and sort of just critical thinking about maybe this is like this pattern that works in a lot of sites, but what's specifically going to look here, and what are all the different things that could be causing this effect, and how can we design questions into our sites and our landscapes in addition to all these other functions that we're designing in, right? In addition to food production and biodiversity, how can we design some of our questions into those sites? And for me, I think that just actually is about us talking to each other and coordinating our work and collaborating to build that culture.
Absolutely.
That was just the right question for me, obviously, because that's something I'm doing a lot of thinking about. But thanks for that great question. And I should actually go and attend directly to those questions by going through my work. So I just want to say thank you again to Karin and to Bonita and all the folks who've offered questions, and looking forward to being in touch soon.
Big hugs, Rafter.
Thanks, Rafter. Take care.
You too. Bye.
For those of us who can stay on for a few more minutes, let's not stay too much longer, but there's a few things. Somebody wrote in, they didn't leave a name, but they said the next IPC is in London in 2015.
Yep.
And then in India 2 years later. So that's something to put on your calendar. Monica, I think you wanted to respond to something, and there's two other questions, that I feel like are really burning on the stack. one, I really like this question. How do we measure the success of permaculture as a movement? You know, like if you don't know what you're going to measure, how do you design it well enough so you can measure the outcomes? I think that's a great question. And then you can maybe, I think this is another great question. This is again from Elias in Mexico City. Where can I find some extremely successful permaculture projects on all levels? So I'm assuming that means from like, you know, like really grassroots, small, you know, homesteads to like large, broad scale stuff. And just to see if people know of them, or like how do we share this knowledge better? You know, whether it's you know, people doing work in third world and we being able to connect with them, or like being able to find great permaculture sites. I know there's directories out there and stuff and great efforts at that, but it doesn't seem like we're all finding the information we need. So those are two questions.
Exactly.
They're probably related.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect for what I was going to say, which is that to Elias, I would just be curious to know if you've connected with Permaculture Mexico and other people and organizations down there doing stuff, because I think they would definitely be able to tell you the information that you would be seeking if you mean Mexico. And that I think that one of the biggest barriers, going back to what Abby had said, to being able to communicate with regional and international and everything is that most people don't know each other. That's what comes out of the international IPC. You get to know each other. And then people are like, oh, here, call me or email me or Skype me. This is what happens when we all meet together. I think that it's a very different feeling meeting someone in person than talking to them when you've never met them before on the phone or other things. At least it's been a very different feeling to me. And just creating these networks that aren't there and these connections that aren't there is one of the ways to be able to get this resource and information out there. I think that I'm one of those people who I want to go see Mark Shepard's farm. It's one of the largest permaculturally designed farms. I want to go see that. I need to visually see it. And I will take it in so much better than watching a video about it. And that's in Wisconsin, and that's one of the chores that we're going to do. It's that ability of being able to sit in a room, and not on a one-hour Skype call, but sit an entire day hanging with people from Mexico and from Canada and talking and having tea and having food and just having that experience of being face-to-face with one another. I think it's infinitely powerful. I honestly love your idea, Bonita, that you have about that, like, you know, but for me, I would only be doing that probably after I'd already met some people. Now that I went to the one in Jordan and now that I went to the one in Cuba, I have people who I can talk to. I didn't have that before. So, and there's going to be people who are coming to the NAPC who've never had that experience. And I think that experience is really important to be able to sit across for 3 days from people who are not, you know, from your region. And some regions, like my friend in Arizona, she's having a really hard time because there isn't a really big permaculture scene there. And and it takes a lot of money and time and resources to put together convergences. It takes a lot of energy to put together anything. Energy and time. A lot of energy. And time that you don't get paid for it because you're a volunteer.
Monica, I want to follow up on what you're saying because this is so near and dear to my heart, having been home with kids for so many years. And it ties in both with how do we evaluate permaculture and success as a movement. One is, you know, at these events, you know, leaving ample time for us to have, you know, group evaluation of how the event went. And not just a questionnaire at the end, but actually like dedicated sessions to it. And I think one of the things that could be really great is, you know, if people who, you know, go to convergences, you know, we could even regionally ask people who don't typically go, help them go and ask them to actually gather the community and permaculturists together, or even do a larger group, a larger talk for the wider community, which would be great for raising awareness about permaculture when they come back. But, you know, kind of more, you know, seeds, you know, like the seed goes out and sprouts and comes back and brings back the harvest to us. That was one thing that came up for me as you were speaking.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a great idea, definitely. I think it will be very, very interesting. And yeah, I think that it's interesting how many people I meet who are from this area who don't know, who I've met in other places outside of New York who don't know anyone in New York doing permaculture. I'm like, how could you not do that? How could you not know? Like, oh, you're where? Oh, my friend Bonita's up there. You should totally connect with her.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be, as far as Eastern Ontario. But I think that I like the live webcasting. I like a lot of the ways that we can use digital media to be able to spread the information far and wide, but it's still not the same as being there. But it will work for the information, for sure.
Yeah.
Great. Any last comments or questions? Bonita?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that just to the question about convergences, so the North American convergence, the dates are August 29th to 31st, 2014, and it's in Minnesota. And the website is northamericanpermaculture.org. And for the Latin American convergence, I don't have any information on it, so I would encourage folks to contact Beatriz Arjona. And I don't have her email, but she is on Facebook. So if you want to friend her on Facebook, I think that might be the easiest way. Or if you are not on Facebook, then I think maybe email one of us and we can try and put you in contact with her to get more information on the Latin American convergence.
And Arjona is Arjona.
Yes.
Yes. I did have a comment, Karen. I wanted to say thank you. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Merci.
Wow. What a wonderful service you've done for so many people who wanted to be there, who wanted to hear about it, or even just relive it a little bit. Thank you so much.
And thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much for saying that. It means a lot to me. And I mean, really, it's the problem and solution. Like instead of me feeling like, oh, I'm isolated, I'm going to be like, there's tons of people who also couldn't go. And jokingly, I mentioned this in the permaculture podcast too. I'm coming up with a term like the eco-feminist multicultural value chain. Like instead of acting like there's only a few ways to participate in the permaculture movement, let's just make sure that we figure out how to make it work for women and people of color and everybody else. Let's just create forums and services and stuff that meet for everybody and stuff like that. So if anybody is still on the web who would like to hear more about social permaculture or women in permaculture or becoming a professional in permaculture, if you click on the more events like this button, it will take you to my contact form for my website. You can sign up there. But I hope this is the first of many good things to come, and I want to thank my courageous and collaborative co-presenters and shout out also to Pandora and Beatriz. You are with us in spirit.
We missed you. You're with us in spirit.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
And thank you to everyone that's out there listening today. Thank you for all thanks for everyone's energy and time. Happy International Permaculture Day.
Woo woo.